Quay nabi buwajikan quay indishnakas, makwandoram, kirigan sibi Scotland and Dunjaba, nishnabi quay indao.
Sego Soguego, Lohetil Yungats.
Donc, Angèle Baudry, du Conseil scolaire catholique du district des Grandes-Rivières. Je suis responsable du dossier des Premières Nations métisses et inuites pour la région entre Heureuse et New Liskeard.
My name is Monica Ituksator. I'm originally from Igloolik. I'm a survivor of 3 residential schools.
Annie Kwekwe, allô, bonjour. Je me nomme Mélanie, bidabing kwendijne kaz, Sabri Dunjaba, Maïngan Dodem. Mon nom spirituel, c'est Première Lumière du Jour. Je viens de Sabri et puis mon clan, c'est le Loup. Je suis une fière femme métisse francophone.
Mon nom est Marie-Claire Vignola, c'est mon nom de baptême, mais j'ai aussi un nom autochtone qui est Nindawenej Disnekas, qui veut dire femme qui lance sa voix sur l'eau, ou qui porte sa voix sur l'eau. J'ai aussi un clan, Wabege chez Dodem. Mon clan est celui de la Martre.
So, Annie Beaujou, Chantal Dijnekaz, Donjiba Field, Degani Ninda, and Martin Clan, Anishinaabe, Franco-Ontarian Kwe.
Celeste Contant Rodriguez Shandashnakas, Inegani Kwe, Nindigo, Ojibmawang, Nesquakamak, Nindajaba, Nesquakamak, Ninda.
Salut bien, je m'appelle Juliette Denis, puis je suis une métisse. Puis j'ai venu au monde à River Valley, un tout petit village pas loin d'ici.
In 1968, January 18, my legal name at birth was Kawisa E72529. Let that sink in.
When I introduce myself as Mohawk, with Bear Clan, we're raising the level of our conversation to something I know who I am. I want to know who you are. We're not Aboriginal. Indigenous is a little softer term, but I think the respect comes from when you learn to know who we are as Mohawk people, part of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, the original 5 nations.
Donc moi, comme étant jeune femme autochtone, je suis très fière d'être Première Nation, je suis très fière de ma culture. Donc ce que moi j'aimerais faire avec les jeunes, c'est qu'ils soient fiers eux aussi de s'identifier comme étant Première Nation, ou Métis ou Inuit. Donc je veux que les élèves viennent nous voir puis dire moi aussi je suis Première Nation. C'était pas toujours quelque chose qu'on a dévoilé au public, qu'on était autochtone ou Première Nation. Donc, pour moi, c'est important que les jeunes, après qu'ils nous voient, ils nous disent c'est correct qu'on est Première Nation et on doit être fiers aussi.
We're going to go back 500 years. And there's been 500 years of stuff that have happened. It's been our children that have been put into residential schools. It's been our children that have been taken away from their parents in the 60s scoop and put into foster homes.
Eventually, with the 60s scoop, where children were still taken out by government-sponsored controls and moved to foster families, that those foster families were still left in a predicament of not understanding themselves how to have some kind of cultural sensitivity to these foster children, and these foster children then get lost in the system and eventually become Canadian, but without any identity outside of that.
We're all treaty people, and I think there's a misunderstanding of when those treaties were completed, is that our people understood in the language. They didn't speak English. They spoke in the Anishinaabe language, and so their understanding of what was agreed upon is different than the settlers. And so the settlers believe that we gave away the land, but that's not what we believe. We believe that we agreed to live side by side and share in the resources and share with what, with the settlers.
The question is always, well, what do you Indians want? He turned it around and said, what do white people want? He says, what they wanted was the land, the resources. And it's so important when you see when I look at the administration of Indians on this continent was really reservations, put them aside, and we want the land. We need the land, whether it's for agriculture, the colony or whatever. We need the land and we need those resources.
It's been how our veterans were treated when they returned home. They fought in both World War I and World War II, and they were not treated the same as other veterans. It's us being put into reserves. That wasn't our way of doing, of being. And so there's been many, many things that our people have endured in 500 years.
It just cracks me up sometimes when I look at the evolution of the Department of Indian Affairs, where, first of all, of course, it was run by the military through the Prime Minister, John MacDonald, but it was mostly military, except when it really got down to, I think, in the 1900s, when it became Mines and Resources. But was really a slap when we were part of administration of the Citizenship and Immigration Department. And I go, wow, talk about assimilation, wanting to force us into being that.
When I grew up, which is just a short while ago, we didn't identify as Métis. We grew up in a Métis community. We knew we were Métis, but that word was never uttered. My grandmother told me, don't ever tell anybody who you are because they'll take you away.
J'ai appris très tard, je dirais dans les années 80, et les chances sont que c'est après que la Constitution a encastré les droits dans la Charte canadienne. Et je pense que là, les gens ont commencé à laisser, finalement, c'est un petit peu plus sécuritaire de laisser échapper le secret. Mais ma mère l'a appris en même temps que nous. Ma mère ne savait même pas qu'elle était métisse. Alors, c'est terrible. Elle a 90 ans maintenant, puis on l'a appris dans les années 80. Alors, je dois vous dire, et je veux partager ça parce que j'ai de la difficulté souvent à raconter cette petite page-là, mais je ne veux pas vous faire sentir mal, mais c'est parce que je le revis en dedans de moi à chaque fois. Puis je me corrige pas. Il faut que ça sorte comme ça. C'est la seule façon que je peux. Mais quand je l'ai appris, j'ai vécu un deuil. Un deuil. Je me suis dit, premièrement, c'est pas possible. Écoute, à l'âge que j'ai là, comment ça se fait que j'ai jamais su ça? Et puis, après le choc est parti, j'ai devenu tellement fâchée. J'étais choquée contre les gouvernements. J'étais même choquée contre mes ancêtres parce que je me suis dit, coudonc, on n'avait pas le culot de dire qui on est, qu'est-ce qui est arrivé là.
When I used to go to Moosonee for the summer, my mom used to send me to go stay with my uncle. And I had cousins and cousins in Moosonee, just go hang out for the summer. Come towards the end of August, the streets in Moosonee would empty.
It was like there was a death in the community. Everybody was like mourning.
If you can imagine what it must have been like in northwestern Ontario in September every year, because our communities, their children were taken from them, and the parents were threatened with jail time if they didn't allow their children to be taken to the residential schools.
Make First Nations and Indigenous people part of mainstream Canada. And this became contrary to ideas such as the two-row, where it would be two separate peoples. Now it's being viewed as it should be one people's going together. And this is where conflict arises with First Nations, because government officials start assuming parent roles and responsibilities and fiduciary responsibilities.
I remember being told by an interpreter that we are not to speak unless we speak in English. And the only word in English I knew was hello. So I didn't speak much that year.
And the people that were in the residential schools and running those programs at the time, I'm sure they thought they had the very best interests of the children in mind, but they really didn't.
A tool that was used by the government at the time that had consequences in which they felt they were doing for the greater good, but actually caused harm by having physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual abuses.
There was a girls' dorm and a boys' dorm. And us girls weren't allowed to talk to boys. But on my 6th year, my last year in Chesterfield, we could visit our brothers for 15 minutes every Sunday.
I hadn't met my sisters and my brother till I was 16 or more. And then they ended up, they were doing okay, you know, they're still alive except for my brother. I maintain he never recovered. Yes, they were doing things to him like if he peed the bed, they'd throw him in a snowbank, you know, stuff like that. That's how they treated kids back then.
We were humiliated a lot. Like we had to line up for the ruler. I don't know why. And if we did something like, if we didn't do our homework, maybe, we had to put a dunce cap on and stand in front of the class, and our classmates would laugh at us.
The legacy of residential school, there's multiple components of it. The end result is that communities are wounded. This country is wounded, in my opinion. Families, individuals are wounded.
When I first had my first baby, I was so embarrassed because I knew I had to hold the baby and kiss the baby or love the baby, but it took some effort to do that because I never saw that.
It's really hard to work there. Coming from a residential school and saying that you'd never ever be back in a school again.
I used to wonder, why do I behave the way I do? Like, why do I drink? Why is there so much violence in the home?
And these are the traumas that have continued through residential schools all the way up until 1996, when the last one in Canada was closed.
If you're not angry about how things have played out, you're living in a dream world. If you're not angry, then you either have thick skin or you're living in a dream world.
The residential school legacy stays with us, and it's going to stay with us for a long time.
You know, this is our reality.
I'm still struggling with trying to feel like a Canadian. What is a Canadian? Who is a Canadian? If I'm not a Canadian, you're not a Canadian. That's the way I look at it.
Our youth want to know. When I speak to non-native students about what I'm telling you now, even about the effects of residential schools or anything like that, their questions are endless. They just come up, they're so interested, they just go, wow, we need to know more. Where can we find out more?
In the TRC and our travels, people were coming to us and saying, how is it that I didn't know? I was born in this country, raised in this country, went to school, I went to university.
The Canadian people were not aware of the full ramifications of this effect, and then First Nations people did not understand the true rationale and the understanding of how these pains can go between generations.
You're living in a community like Sudbury, and you go down the road and find 5 households, and all of a sudden somebody shows up, takes all the kids, say you're coming with us. They're being taken away to a foreign place. You can't see them again for 5 years. When they come back, they're not going to know their language. They're not going to know who they are. They're not going to know where they came from. And so try to get, that sense of share that perspective to another person and say, well, now how do you think that would make you feel?
We feel that the history of residential schools belongs to all of us. It is a shared Canadian history, and we need to learn from that history. We can't change the past.
People shouldn't feel guilty about our past. People should not feel wounded as a result of this.
It's not their fault that they don't know this now. And here's an opportunity for you to affect change and do something differently to ensure that all of the students who are in our system right now are going to graduate, and it's going to be different for them, that they will know the truth.
On veut faire de la nouvelle histoire du Canada.
So I think it's important that the kids, the students, the administration, the principals and vice principals all have a deeper and richer understanding of our history here.
Enseigner les 7 enseignements sacrés qui sont des valeurs qui existent dans presque toutes les cultures, mais sont plus évident dans les 7 enseignements sacrés. C'est pas une histoire, puis là, il faut que tu devines. C'est vraiment, bam, l'honnêteté. Voici l'honnêteté. Voici l'humilité. Voici le respect. Voici le courage. Voici la sagesse. Voici l'amour. Je pense que j'ai tout dit, mais donc, en tout cas, c'est ça que je dirais. Plus de sensibilisation, plus de respect, moins d'appropriation de la culture. Je disais même à un élève, elle m'a demandé « Ah, as-tu eu la chance de faire le calumet quand tu étais jeune? » J'ai dit « Pas à l'école. À l'école, j'ai été appris que j'étais un sauvage, puis que je sculptais les têtes des autres. Mais la vérité est qu'il y avait une guerre contre toutes les colonies, contre les Autochtones. T'sais, ils nous tuaient. Alors, c'est une des raisons qu'on l'a gardé à la bouche fermée. T'sais, on ne veut pas dénoncer qu'on est fiers d'être francophone, mais en tant qu'autochtone, parce que, tu sais, on a des stéréotypes négatifs. Donc, puis ça, c'est tout causé par l'Indian Act, tu sais, causé par les écoles pensionnats.
Qu'est-ce que je suggérais aux gens dans les conseils scolaires? C'est de s'assurer que leurs écoles sont accueillantes pour les jeunes. Je sais que comme c'est là, on se base beaucoup sur les aptitudes puis du rendement des élèves autochtones dans les écoles, mais il faut vraiment regarder à comment est-ce qu'ils se sentent. Est-ce qu'ils se sentent accueillis? Parce qu'une fois que les enfants vont se sentir accueillis, tout le restant va s'encheminer. Le rendement d'école va suivre, puis l'enfant va se sentir chez eux.
We need to create a safe environment for those to feel proud about their language, proud about their culture, proud about their spirituality.
Toutes les actions que nous avons mises en place étaient vraiment, dans un premier temps, conscientiser la population, que ce soit le personnel, les élèves, non PNMI, si vous voulez, de ce que c'est être un élève PNMI. Donc, on a débuté par... Pour nous, c'est important donc d'avoir une conseillère ou une personne attitrée au dossier pour faire avancer. Puis une des premières actions qu'on a fait, c'est vraiment de s'assurer de pouvoir avoir une auto-identification des élèves PNMI. Donc, ça a démarré lentement, mais depuis quand même le 5 ans, nous avons identifié un grand nombre d'élèves.
C'est c'est un feu fort dans mon cœur qu'il faut que je dois prendre la relève. T'sais? Donc, c'est peut-être la première raison que je fais ceci. Puis la deuxième, ça serait évidemment qu'on est à l'heure de la vérité, la réconciliation. Et donc, une autre affaire pour guérir non seulement cette nation, mais de guérir la génération qui vient.
Donc, il y a du travail à faire sur ce côté-là.
It's going to take 7 generations, in my opinion, to get us out of where we got to.
We need to move forward in a better way somehow.
Well, now that you know, what are you going to do about it?